All right, there we
Okay.
go. Well, thanks for coming to us live from the winery.
Indeed.
As you know, we're not visiting wineries this year because of all of the current conditions that are in place. So instead, we're doing virtual visits, but we're very happy to include you all in the Slow Wine Guide this year, especially with our first year including New York wineries.
Well, we're as Lakewood Vineyards, I speak for all of us. We're very pleased to be part of this group.
Excellent. Well, why don't you start off by telling us the story of Lakewood and maybe telling us about some of the key people who work there?
Okay. So you want me to go back and give you a little history about us?
That'd be great.
Okay. So the current farm, we have 85 acres of grapes today, started with few grapes and some peach trees in 1951, when my grandfather, who was a dentist in World War II on a battleship, I mean, you got 2,000 people, I guess you need a dentist.
True.
But after the war was over, he started a dental practice and decided he didn't like it and he wanted to farm. So we had family up in the Finger Lakes, and so he moved the family up to where this area here, and bought I don't know how many acres it was at the time, but they raised tomatoes and strawberries and potatoes and whatever they could to make a living, and some of it happened to be grapes, and they found out year after year they had a nice market for grapes. So grapes slowly took over the rest of the farm, and it ended up becoming really the only cash crop that we grow here now. And it's expanded. We've purchased some adjacent properties over the years, and added acres of grapes. So now we have about 85 acres of grapes and some more that's been had some new drainage tile put in that we're planning on planting when we can afford it. It's kind of an expensive venture to put grapes in the ground. So that was 1951, and when he started this, and it's grown. But in the early 70s, grapes weren't bringing in a lot of money, and so the farm was seeing fewer and fewer profits over the years. I eventually moved on to making wine at a number of different wineries, and then eventually Ohio State University, where I was doing extension work and had a nice lab, and it was a nice job with good pay. But my brother was left here back on the farm growing grapes, and he decided that he wasn't, my brother Dave specifically, decided that he didn't want to live on peanuts, and told my dad that he was going to leave unless we took on a project that had potential for making more money, i.e. a winery in this case. So he wanted to vertically integrate. So we had a little call together, and we sat down as a family and decided that we would all throw our money in the hat, what we had, and start Lakewood Vineyards, which so that was 1987. We had the discussion. 1988, we had the winery started, and we opened our doors for sales in 1989. And that first year we made 4,500 gallons. And so that brings us to 1988. Now to present, we're doing, this year it won't be quite as much, but we've been doing generally right around 100,000 gallons a year here at Lakewood Vineyards, and 100% Finger Lakes grapes, a good deal of it from right here on our own specific estate grown vineyards.
Fantastic. So you've seen some things change over the years, I'll bet.
Oh, I sure have, Courtney. And you say you want slow wine. Well, this has been slow growth, and everybody goes, well, you guys just exploded and grew. Well, no, that's not really. It looks that way. We add on a big building, and then we slowly fill it up over the years as our production has grown, as we learn how to make, I would say, better wine maybe, or make better packages, make better sales. It's all part of the same thing, and we do a better job, I think, all the time. And being established and developing your clientele over time. It hasn't been a meteoric rise. It's been a slow wine rise, you know? And so, yeah, just slow and steady, and long, hard working days, and eventually we're the tortoise, not the hare. So.
Fantastic. Will you tell me a little bit about the vineyards that you work with? I know that you have estate vineyards, but you also work with some other Finger Lakes fruit.
That is true. So even and I'm going to tell just a small snippet of a story. 1995. So the winter of 94, 95 was so harsh that there was almost no Riesling at all in 1995.
Wow.
That vintage was so small that all of our Riesling we put it in one 500-gallon tank. That was all of our
Wow.
vineyards. So the crop was incredibly small because all the primary buds got damaged in the winter, and a lot of trunk damage in that very tough year. A lot of wineries opted to get fruit from out of state, primarily, like maybe Washington and Oregon and that. And we made the very conscious decision that we weren't going to do that, that we didn't want to ever be a wine factory. We wanted to be a winery that stood for a sense of place. And so our wines have always been, and if I ever have anything to say about, always will be 100% Finger Lakes wine. Generally, we like to make that estate grown, but there's some awful good growers out there in our neighborhood that don't have wineries, and they just grow really good grapes. And those are vineyards that we are proud to incorporate in our winemaking here. So even though a bunch of our wines are estate grown, even a lot of our Rieslings, they are not necessarily, all of them. They may have, there's other wines that are blends and have Riesling pulled in from usually the west side of Seneca, so just up the road. And that's for a couple of reasons. Not that I think that there's not good grapes grown on the other side, because there certainly is. But it's a lot easier for me to manage checking on the vineyards and talking to the growers if I kind of keep them consolidated in the area as well. So I don't have to drive around the lake and up the lake and so on. And then some from the east side of Keuka Lake and the bluff on Keuka Lake. And that's where we draw 95% of our fruit.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Have you made any major changes in the last year to your vineyard management techniques, or are these techniques that you've kind of honed over time?
Yeah, no real major changes. It's a process that we go through. People go, well, you must have done a lot of things different because you got this award, or we've gotten a lot of awards for our farming practices here, how they're they're very conservation oriented. But my dad died in 2007, but he'd been working on his farm since 1951. And that's always how his brain worked. And I go back and I see black and white photos on magazines, Wine East, one that I don't see anymore, but had a picture of him on the front rolling out big bales of hay or forking off bales of hay down the middle of the row to add organic matter and hold the moisture and to keep water from washing off the dirt. That was in 1968 or something like that. So it's been an ongoing practice. It's nice that we're getting noticed for it, but my dad wanted generations going forward to have even better farm than what he was working with. Mm-hmm. And so it's not one of those things where we're going to be in and out of here. This has been a family farm for a long time now. And so the farming practices, as we learn more, certainly we're gonna we'll look at the science behind it and try to do what we're doing now even better. As long as we keep the right mindset, I think that our approach may evolve, but it's always about doing what's best for the long term.
Definitely. Speaking of a multi-generational approach, got anyone in the next generation that you think might take over in the future?
Well, yeah, I think they might just kick me out today. So my two older kids, both that's Ben and Abby, and they have viticulture and enology degrees from Cornell University. I'm surprised they went into the business, honestly, because they just saw their mom and dad get up and go to work 7 days a week. I'm like, these kids are not going to want anything to do with this, but it must be that the joy and the rewards that we felt, in the business rubbed off as well, not just the long hours. And the two of them have both got their degrees, and they traveled around the world. They went to New Zealand and worked to harvest, or Australia, California, Oregon. So they've got some nice experience. Even Florida. Abby worked to harvest in Florida.
Oh, cool.
And Well, because she was still at school and she wanted someplace that was harvesting while she had summer vacation. Not a lot of options in this hemisphere.
Yeah.
But they've had some experiences, and that those experiences have been very valuable to us because they've learned how to work equipment that I'd never seen, and they learn a lot about winemaking techniques. We didn't want to, even though we want family to be involved here, we didn't want to become our knowledge to become inbred. Where that's the way we've always done it, sort of thing. We're always looking for opportunities to change as long as it's an improvement. And certainly the kids have brought that to the table. They keep the old man from being an old stick in the mud.
Well, that's great to hear. Moving over to the winemaking side of things, how would you describe your winemaking style?
I'd like to say, I mean, I know it's really chick to say, I'm just a total non-interventionist and that we just let the wine make itself so it expresses the vineyard. But I honestly don't believe in that at all. My true feelings are that making wine is by virtue of being a winemaker, you're an interventionist. You've already picked the grapes. That's an intervention. You've brought them into the winery. That's an intervention. You've crushed them. All these things are interventions because we don't want the final product that Mother Nature had in mind for those grapes, which is compost. We want good wine. So we found out ways to use Mother Nature to our advantage and perform those natural processes, but to do the things along the way that encourage them to make a product that will enjoy, not not what Mother Nature might have allowed for without intervention. So yeah, I'm an interventionist, but am I an unnatural interventionist? No, I want to work with the organisms that God gave us to make these wonderful products, but I want to encourage them to do the right thing. So yeah, do I use all sorts of wild yeast? Well, certainly there's some wild yeast present in there because we don't pasteurize our juice or filter our juice to eliminate them. But we also add cultures of yeast that we know will produce the kind of wine, or at least give us the opportunity to make the kind of wine that we want. And these are good, strong fermenters that have good aromatics, and helps us make a nice product without. If you're rolling the dice every time, then I mean, I'm not knocking those who like to go with a natural ferment. So you bring in the juice, you let whatever yeast is present to ferment them down. They can make very interesting wines. They won't tell you about the batches they have to throw out though, because they were subpar. So yeah, we had natural yeast, not bioengineered yeast or anything like that. They're actually yeast that have been selected from great batches of wine from some great wine region in the world. And they said, this one made a great wine. So let's take that one and let's grow it up into a big batch of those, let them have lots of babies, and then we'll sell them to other people. So that's kind of what we do. Then our processes are use of gravity to clarify wine. And generally it only goes through filter pads one time. I don't know if I'm touching all the right buttons on this, but
there's no right or wrong. Go ahead.
Okay. So, and our bottling process is we don't use preservative chemicals other than sulfur dioxide in our still wines, and because we just use cold sterile bottling, and that means that and that sterile bottling only is for anything with residual sugar. Our dry wines, we may skip the membrane filtration part altogether, but they'll go through a set of sterile pads and down through a membrane, and that will remove any yeast that might potentially ferment the wine if it has any residual sugar. That's a concern, of course. If you're going to make a commercial wine and it's going to be on the shelf, if it starts to ferment, you have the production of carbon dioxide, and now you have champagne in a non-champagne bottle, which can create an explosion or push the corks out and things like that. So we use a sterile bottling method. It allows us to not have to add preservatives and or pasteurize, and there's a series of other chemicals that actually are approved for winemaking. But we like to go the not most non-intervention route on that.
Right. And in
Um,
terms of the wines themselves, are there any qualities that you generally look for your wines to have, whether it's ageability, approachable, youthful drinking? Do you like them to vary, with the vintage or be a little more consistent?
Well, we don't intermingle our vintages because we do want the vintages to speak clearly of the year that they came from, and in that respect they do differ. So we've got a year like this right now. It's dry and been very, very warm, and so I know that the acids are going to be a little bit lower. We may pick them a little earlier to try to preserve some of the acids, and especially in the whites. The reds, that's really not an issue. I prefer a little lower acid reds, and if we can get them this year, that would be great. And but things like Riesling need acid, and if you wait too long on a year like this, you may cook some of that out of there, and then all of a sudden it doesn't really taste like Finger Lakes Riesling on a year like this. This is not a Finger Lakes summer, having this kind of heat that we've had this year. It's a little atypical. So we have to think on our feet, of course, through harvest and everything, to see where the grapes are going and make decisions at that point. But circle back to your question, which I'm not sure I even recollect now. but so we do want the vintages to differ, not because we want them to differ, but because they are different, and we don't cross blend to make a consistent product. Every time you run out of a vintage of wine and you put a new one in, I think it should be a fresh new experience for your customer coming in, to say, oh, look, it's a new vintage, and be excited about what that may hold. And do we want them to age? Of course, we want them to be very ageable. There's some wines that are, and some wines that aren't, just by their very nature. We make some wine called Niagara. It's made out of the Niagara grape. I think of it as a beer. The fresher, the better. And but I had a bottle of 10-year-old Riesling the other day. It tasted like I just bottled it. It was that kind of youthful. And I think generally, if you're careful about making Riesling in the Finger Lakes, it's going to be very ageable almost every year. Low pHs, higher acids. But we also do a lot of things to try to add to that potential ageability of the wine. And some of that comes from just how much oxygen the wine is exposed to before it goes into the bottle. Mm-hmm. And so careful winemaking, we have a nitrogen generator, so we have unlimited amounts of nitrogen. So anytime we're moving wine, say from one tank to another, we'll gas that tank with nitrogen to eliminate oxygen in there, and nitrogen's inert and it won't dissolve in the wine. So when you move the wine over, it doesn't pick up any oxygen. Well, it picks up very, very little oxygen. There's no way to avoid it entirely, and you probably don't want to. But if you keep that oxygen sink from being filled in the wine, then that gives it more years in the bottle down the road, because we're at the bottom of this huge ocean of oxygen, and it seeps into everything, including bottles of wine. But if it's already overdosed and then you put it in a bottle, then that's not going to have much age. But if it's received very little oxygen over its life up to that point, then it's going to last a lot longer. And so we treat wines like that. And in some cases, that may not be the case with reds, where you need to evolve tannins and such that require some small doses of air. Those wines will go into oak barrels, and the oak will help slowly soften those tannins by letting a little bit of air pass through the staves and stuff. But Riesling, of course, is another animal.
Fantastic. And I have to ask, of course, how have you all been faring with the events of the last few months? This very different year that we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, is there something going on? No, I'm kidding you. Yeah, it's been
news.
It's been one of the strangest years. Nobody saw this one coming, but I would say most of the dealing with it has fallen on my wife Liz's shoulders, because she has had to deal with the changes with our interface with the public, and she and Erin, of course, huge. My sister-in-law Erin, who's run our our social media. And she came up with some brilliant ideas and helped us stay engaged with our customer base. And our shipping has been very good through the spring when we were on lockdown and nobody could really come in and visit. Our sales remained fairly good. And now that we can be reopened, but there's a whole lot of new rules. We have the social distancing. If you roll in a car with 2 people, you and one other, then you get your own spot at the bar, and anybody else has to be at least 6 feet away from you. And then the mask wearing all day long and things like that. I'm just thankful I'm back in the cellar where I'm already socially distanced and I don't have to do that. But the people out front are working very, very hard to make sure that everybody stays safe. The sanitizing, the amount of isopropyl, we used about 15 gallons of high-proof spirits that I usually use for my port. Because you couldn't get alcohol or sanitizer anywhere.
Right.
So I'm pulling this out of a cube. It's all distilled brandy, and we're using that just to sanitize things.
Wow.
But you do what you got to do, and out front has been the bigger deal. But I'm amazed at the number of people that are out and they're behaving and they're practicing, all the recommended procedures with masks until they sit down and they taste the wines. And it's been an amazing procedure that everybody's so willing to go through, and the number of people that we've had come out, because I think people are just exhausted from all this, and they want to do something that's not high risk, but gets them out where, they're out and about. They're tired of being locked in an apartment or what have you. So.
Well, I look forward to the day that I can come visit you guys again. I've been once and I really enjoyed myself. So hopefully sooner rather than later. But
really, I know we're all praying for that day, huh?
Yeah.
And so I do hope that you can get back up here sooner rather than later.
Definitely. Well, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you today. Thanks for taking the time.
And Courtney, thank you for forgiving me for.
No worries.
I wasn't blowing off. I just lose track of time when I'm at work, I guess, so.
Understandable.
All right. Well,
All right.
You take care. Thank you, Courtney.
You too. Bye.
Bye.